My name is Eugene Calloway. I'm 50 years old. I've been the principal of Hargrove County High School in Milledgeville, Georgia for 11 years. I've talked teenagers through panic attacks before finals. I've sat with parents who didn't know how to say their child was struggling. I've handled every kind of crisis you can imagine inside a school building. But nothing, not one single thing in my professional life, prepared me for standing in my own kitchen on a Tuesday night, watching my wife and my daughter tell me to disappear. And the worst part wasn't what they said. The worst part was that when I looked at their faces, I believed them. Before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand who I was before it. I grew up the second of two boys in a small house in Warner Robins, Georgia. My father worked at Robins Air Force Base for 31 years. My mother taught elementary school. We were not wealthy people, but we were a family that showed up for each other. My older brother Clifford used to say our parents ran their home like a democracy. One man, one vote, except Dad's vote counted twice. We'd laugh at that. It was a good kind of laugh, the kind that comes from safety. I carried that idea into my own life. I believed in showing up. I believed in staying. I met Pamela Durant at a teacher's workshop in Macon back in 1998. She taught 8th grade English at a middle school on the south side of the city. She was tall, quick-witted, and had this way of making every sentence sound like the most important thing you'd ever hear. I was gone the first time she disagreed with the workshop facilitator out loud. Not rudely, just clearly, like someone who knew exactly where the line was and wasn't afraid to stand on it. We dated for 2 years, got married in June of 2001 at a small church in her hometown of Sandersville. Her father cried during the ceremony. My brother Clifford was my best man and spent his entire toast roasting me about the time I failed my driver's test 3 times. Pamela laughed so hard she nearly knocked over her champagne. Our daughter Reese came along in 2004. I remember holding her for the first time in the recovery room at Baldwin County Medical Center. The weight of her in my arms felt like something I didn't deserve. She had Pamela's dark eyes and my wide forehead, and she looked up at me like she already knew something I didn't. I coached her little league team. I drove her to violin lessons for 6 years, even though the only song she ever actually finished was a version of Hot Cross Buns that could have shattered glass. I sat in the front row of every school play. I showed up. That was the thing about me. I always showed up. But somewhere between Reese's first violin lesson and her sophomore year of college at the University of Georgia in Athens, something shifted. Not all at once. Slowly. The way a house settles on its foundation. You don't notice the cracks until one day the door doesn't close right anymore. The first thing I want you to hear is this. I am not a perfect man. I worked too much. That's the truth. When the school board started pushing for new standardized testing protocols, and our district's scores were under the microscope, I was at the building by 6 in the morning and home after dark. I missed dinners. I missed Pamela's school awards ceremony 2 years running because I had board meetings. I forgot their anniversary dinner reservations once, in 2019, and Pamela told her sister about it, and that story got around, and I heard it repeated at a family cookout like I was already a cautionary tale. I'm not making excuses. I'm setting the table so you understand what came next. Reese graduated college in May of last year, moved back home while she figured out her next step. She was 20 years old and brilliant and restless in the way that only very smart people can be. Like her skin didn't quite fit the life she was supposed to be living. She wanted to move to Atlanta. Pamela wanted her close. And I was somewhere in the middle, trying to be the Switzerland of my own household, which, as it turns out, is not a sustainable position. The tension started building around September. Reese had a job offer from a marketing firm in Buckhead, good salary, real opportunity, and Pamela thought it was too soon, too far, too much. I thought Reese should take it. That became the first real line drawn in the sand. Pamela said, I was pushing our daughter away. Reese said I didn't understand the pressure she was under. I said I understood pressure just fine, thank you. That conversation ended with 2 slammed doors and Pamela sleeping in the guest room for the first time in our 22 years of marriage. I should have known then, but I didn't. Before we go any further, if this kind of story speaks to you, if you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home, please hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below telling me something about a time someone you loved made you feel like you were the problem. And if this video is already hitting close to home, give it a like so other people can find it. We're just getting started. October in Milledgeville is when the pecans start dropping in the yard. I remember that because the Tuesday night everything fell apart. I had been outside for an hour raking them up. It was a clear night, still warm the way Georgia evenings can be even late in the fall, and I was sweating through my flannel shirt. It was the most peace I'd felt all week. I came inside and washed my hands at the kitchen sink. Pamela was at the island with her laptop. Reese was at the table with her phone. Neither of them looked up. I poured myself a glass of water and asked if anyone was hungry. Just making conversation. Just filling the room the way I always did. Reese said she wasn't eating here tonight. Said she was going to drive up to Atlanta in the morning to meet with the marketing firm again. They'd offered more money, revised the package, and she needed to make some calls first. Pamela's jaw tightened. I saw it. I told Reese that sounded like good news, that the firm was clearly serious about her if they were negotiating. Pamela closed her laptop slowly. That's the sound I associate with the beginning of the end, a laptop closing slowly in a quiet kitchen. She said, "Eugene, can you please stop encouraging this?" I said I wasn't encouraging anything. I was stating a fact. The firm wanted Reese. That was not a bad thing. Pamela said I never thought about what our family needed, that I was always too focused on what looked good on the surface, the achievement, the career, the outcome, but never the actual people in front of me. Reese stood up from the table. I said, "Pamela, I've been thinking about this family for 22 years. Then why does it never feel like it?" Pamela said, and her voice broke, but not in the way a voice breaks from sadness. In the way a voice breaks from something that has been held back too long and is finally coming through. I put my glass down on the counter. I was careful about it. I set it down without making a sound. "What exactly have I not done?" I asked. Steady, calm. The voice I use with students when a situation is escalating and someone has to be the adult. What came next happened fast. Pamela started listing things. The anniversary dinner, the board meetings, the time I chose a school board retreat over Reese's high school graduation dinner. I hadn't even known that one was still on the ledger. I had thought we'd made up for that. We'd gone to dinner the next night. I'd brought flowers. Reese started talking over her mother, saying I always did this. I always made everything about being reasonable, about being the calm one, like my composure was a weapon I was pointing at them. I said, "That's not fair." And Reese, my daughter, my 20-year-old daughter who I held in the recovery room at Baldwin County Medical Center and who couldn't finish hot cross buns, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why don't you just disappear? You're barely here anyway." The room went absolutely quiet. I felt something move through my chest. Not anger. Something colder. I looked at Pamela, waiting for her to say something, waiting for her to be the person who'd stood in a church in Sandersville and made a promise with me, the person who'd handed me our daughter in a hospital blanket, the person who'd eaten breakfast with me every morning for 2 decades. She said, "She's not wrong, Eugene. We'd be better off." I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked to the bedroom. I took the overnight bag from the closet shelf, the one I used for school conference trips, and I packed it. 3 days of clothes, my laptop charger, the folder with my important documents that I keep in the top drawer of my nightstand because my father always told me a man should know where his papers are. I came back through the kitchen. Pamela was still at the island. Reese had gone to her room. I picked up my car keys. I said, "I'll be at Clifford's," and I left. Clifford lives in a ranch house on the east side of Milledgeville, 15 minutes from me. He's been single since his divorce from his first wife in 2009 and has made a comfortable life for himself. His house is clean. He grills on weeknights, and he has the particular settled energy of a man who has decided to be exactly where he is. He answered the door in his bathrobe and took one look at my face. "Come in," he said. No questions. Just, "Come in." He made coffee. I sat at his kitchen table for about 20 minutes without saying anything useful. Then I told him what happened. All of it. Clifford listened the way he always does, without interrupting, without offering the story back to me reframed so it sounds better than it is. When I finished, he said, "How long has it been like this?" I said, "I don't know. Long enough that I didn't see it coming." He nodded. "You staying here for a while?" "If that's okay." "The guest room's already made up," he said. "It's always made up." I went to bed that night in Clifford's guest room and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours. Not running through what I should have said. Not planning my next move. Just sitting with the fact that two people who knew me better than anyone else in the world had just told me to disappear, and the part of me that was most damaged wasn't my pride. It was that I understood why they said it. Not because I was a bad man. I didn't believe I was a bad man. But because I had let the distance grow. I had let the quiet accumulate. I had been present in body and somewhere else entirely in all the ways that actually count. And somewhere in the long middle of our marriage, Pamela had stopped waiting for me to notice, and Reese had simply absorbed her mother's conclusion. That was the thing I lay awake with. Not the cruelty of those words, the trajectory that made them possible. I went to work the next morning. That might surprise you. But I had a school to run, and 1,400 students who needed their principal to show up. And the thing about showing up is that it doesn't stop being the right thing just because your personal life is collapsing. My closest colleague at school is a man named Warren Pruitt. He teaches AP/US history and has been at Hargrove County High for 15 years. Warren is the kind of person who notices things without making a production of noticing them. He knocked on my office door mid-morning, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He set one in front of me and sat down across the desk. "You want to tell me, or should I guess?" he asked. I told him enough. Not everything. Warren didn't need the full inventory of my marriage, just enough to explain why I looked like a man who'd slept 4 hours in a borrowed bed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what's interesting about the word disappear? The kids who run from something don't actually disappear. They just show up somewhere else, usually somewhere worse." I looked at him. "You're not going to disappear," he said. "You're going to figure out what's actually broken. That's different." I've thought about that a lot since. By that first evening at Clifford's, the calls started. Not from Pamela. Not at first. The first call was from Pamela's sister, Denise, who lives in Augusta and who has opinions about everything and shares all of them without being asked. She left a voicemail that began with, "Eugene, I don't know what you did, but Pam is really upset." I did not return that call. The second call was from my mother-in-law, Bernadette, who is 81 years old and sharper than most 40-year-olds I've met, and who said simply, "Eugene, I need you to call me back. I want to hear your side." I did return that call. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Pamela's father used to do the same thing to me, disappear while standing right there in the room. She hates it in you because she spent her whole childhood hating it in him." I didn't know what to do with that except sit with it, which is what I did. There were other calls over the next day, friends of Pamela's, a neighbor who clearly had been briefed on a particular version of events. My father-in-law, who has been dead for 6 years, obviously wasn't among them, but I kept thinking about what Bernadette said. I did not hear from Reese. I did not hear from Pamela, not for 48 hours. On the third morning, I called Harriet Odom. Harriet is a divorce attorney in Milledgeville with an office on West Hancock Street above the dry cleaning place. I had met her twice before, once at a school board fundraiser, once at a community meeting about rezoning. She is 62 years old, methodical, and the kind of attorney who does not waste a syllable. I explained the situation. She told me to come in the following morning. She said to bring whatever financial documents I had. I sat in Clifford's kitchen that night and thought about what I was doing. I thought about Pamela standing at that kitchen island. I thought about Reese at the table with her phone. I thought about 22 years of breakfasts and arguments and vacations and the way Pamela used to reach for my hand during turbulence on airplanes even when she was furious at me about something. I thought about what Clifford had asked me. How long has it been like this? The honest answer was, long enough that we had both become strangers who knew all of each other's stories. This is the part of the story where most people expect something dramatic to happen. An explosion, a confrontation, the big reckoning. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways harder. On the morning of day 4, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. "Pamela." I answered. There was silence for a moment. The kind of silence that means someone rehearsed something and is trying to remember which line comes first. She said, "Where are you sleeping?" I said, "At Clifford's." She said, "Are you coming back?" I said, "I don't know yet." Another silence. She said, "Reese hasn't left her room in 2 days." I said, "Okay." She's not eating right. She's been crying. I said, Pamela, I need you to hear me right now. I love Reese. I would walk through fire for Reese. But she stood in our kitchen and told me to disappear. And you agreed with her. And I need both of you to understand that those words have weight. They have consequences. I am not disappearing. I am standing exactly where I said I'd be. Pamela said very quietly, I know. I said, I'm going to call Harriet Odom today. Another pause. A divorce attorney? She asked. I'm going to understand my options, I said. That's all. Right now I need to think clearly, and I can't do that without information. She hung up without responding. 22 minutes later, my phone lit up. I looked at the screen. 27 missed calls, all stacked up from the past hour. Pamela had called back 17 times, Denise twice, Reese 3 times, Bernadette twice, and a number I didn't recognize 3 times that turned out to be Pamela calling from the landline we have at the house that I had completely forgotten still existed. I sat in Clifford's kitchen with my phone in my hand, watching the number rise, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Grief. Because this was not a victory. A man doesn't win when his wife and daughter are calling him 27 times from a house he should be in. A man doesn't win when the life he built is finally paying attention to him only because he walked out the door. I met with Harriet that morning as planned. She sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and a pen and asked me to describe the marriage from the beginning. I did. She asked about finances, assets, the house, retirement accounts. I answered everything. At the end, she set down her pen and looked at me. Mr. Calloway, she said, I can help you dissolve this marriage efficiently and fairly. You have a strong financial position. The process would be straightforward. I nodded. But I want to ask you something that isn't in my job description, she said. When you walked out of that house, were you leaving because you wanted out, or because you needed them to understand what out would actually look like? I looked at her for a long moment. I don't know yet, I said honestly. She nodded. That's a fair answer. Come back when you do. I called Reese that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, which told me she'd been holding her phone. I said, Hi, baby. She started crying immediately, not the way a child cries, when they want something. The way a person cries when they've said something they can't unsay, and have been living inside that knowledge for 4 days. I let her. When the crying slowed down, I said, I need you to hear me. I'm not angry at you. I'm hurt. Those are different things. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't mean it. She said she was under so much pressure. The job, her mother, the feeling that everyone needed something from her that she didn't have to give, and she took it out on me because I was safe, because I was always there. I said, I was always there. That's the thing, Reese. I was always there, and it still wasn't enough. She cried again. I let her again. Then she said, Are you coming home, Daddy? That was the first time she'd called me Daddy in probably 8 years. You don't realize how much a word can carry until it lands in the right moment. I said, I don't know yet, but I'm not disappearing. I want you to know that. Whatever happens between your mother and me, I am your father. That doesn't go anywhere. I want to tell you about the conversation with Pamela because I think it's the most important part of this story. We met at a coffee shop on South Wayne Street. Neutral ground, neither of our choosing specifically, just a place where we'd both been 100 times and where nobody would make a scene. I got there first. Ordered 2 coffees the way we each take them, because 22 years means you know a thing like that without thinking. She walked in looking like she hadn't slept, which she hadn't. I could tell. She sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, I've been thinking about what Mama told you. I said, About your father? She nodded. She called me after she talked to you. She said she told you. I didn't respond, just waited. My father used to sit in the same room as us and be somewhere else completely, Pamela said. I used to wave my hand in front of his face as a kid just to see if he'd notice. He never did. She paused. And I promised myself I would never feel like that again. And then slowly, over the last few years, I started feeling like that again, and I took it out on you. And so did Reese, because she learned it from me. I said, "You could have told me, Pamela." She said, "I tried. You were always very busy being reasonable." That landed somewhere deep, not because it was unfair, but because it was fair enough to hurt. I said, "I don't know if we can fix 20 years of drift in a conversation." She said, "I'm not asking you to fix it in a conversation. I'm asking you to decide if it's worth trying." I looked at this woman. My wife for 22 years, the woman who'd laughed at my brother's toast, who'd reached for my hand on airplanes, who had stood in our kitchen 4 nights ago and agreed with our daughter that I should disappear. I said, "I went to see Harriet Odom." Pamela's expression didn't change. "I know. Denise's neighbor works in the same building." I said, "Small town." She almost smiled. "Very small town." I said, "I didn't file anything." She said, "I know that too." Here's what I'll tell you about the weeks that followed. We started counseling. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because Harriet had told me something in her office that I kept coming back to. A man doesn't win when his wife and daughter are calling him 27 times from a house he should be in. She hadn't said those words, but the shape of them was there in what she asked me. "Were you leaving because you wanted out, or because you needed them to understand?" The answer, when I was honest with myself, was the second one. I had needed them to feel the weight of what they'd said. I had needed the 27 calls. Not as victory, as information. As evidence that the connection I thought was gone was, in fact, still there. Still desperate. Still reaching. The counselor's name is Dr. Felicia Drummond. She practices out of an office in downtown Milledgeville, and she has this way of asking questions that makes you feel like she already knows the answer and is giving you the chance to arrive at it yourself. In our third session, she asked me to describe what I thought a present husband looked like. I described someone who was there physically, financially stable, reliable, consistent. She said, "And emotionally?" I said, "I expressed things when they were important." She said, "When something was important to Pamela, was it always important to you at the same time?" I thought about the anniversary dinner I forgot, the graduation dinner I missed, the morning Pamela had called me at school because she'd gotten a difficult medical result from a routine test, and I told her I'd call her back in an hour and called her back in 3. "No," I said. "That's the gap," Dr. Drummond said simply. "Not the absence. The timing." Reese took the job in Atlanta. I drove her up on a Sunday in November, helped her move boxes into a second-floor apartment off Peachtree Road in Buckhead. Good neighborhood, solid building, doorman who knew her name by the second trip up the elevator. She was nervous and trying not to show it the way people do when they're also excited and don't want the excitement to be misread as not taking something seriously. When the last box was in, we stood in her empty living room. The Atlanta skyline was visible through the window, the late afternoon light turning everything gold the way it only does in November. She said, "I'm really sorry, Dad, about what I said." I said, "I know. Are you and Mom going to be okay?" I said, "I don't know yet. We're trying." She nodded. "That's more than a lot of people do." She hugged me at the door, and I held on longer than I usually would. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted her to know that the hug was deliberate, that I was present for it. My brother Clifford said something to me on the morning I moved back to the house. He helped me load the overnight bag, which had grown over 2 weeks into 2 full bags and a box of books I'd apparently started accumulating at his place, into my car. He stood in the driveway in the October chill. He said, "You know what's the difference between the men who survive this and the men who don't?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "The ones who survive ask better questions, not what went wrong. What can I actually do differently? Because the first one is just a way of relitigating the past and making yourself the hero of your own story. The second one is actually hard." I drove home thinking about that the whole way. Warren asked me, back in my first week, what was interesting about the word disappear. He said the kids who run from something don't actually disappear. They just show up somewhere else, usually somewhere worse. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of this, the 27 missed calls, the sessions with Dr. Drummond, the conversation in the coffee shop, the drive to Atlanta, the morning at Clifford's kitchen table, is that I almost did disappear. Not in the way Reese meant when she snapped it at me. Not physically. I almost disappeared from the hard work of being truly present. Not just in the building. Not just with my name on the bank accounts and the mortgage and the car insurance, but in the room, in the conversation, in the moments that didn't look like moments until they were gone. I had become a man who showed up and wasn't there. And that, not the blown-up argument, not the words that were said, that was the real crisis. I'm writing this from the kitchen table in our house in Milledgeville. It's early morning. Pamela is making coffee. She doesn't know I'm writing this down. Maybe someday she will. Last Tuesday, she sat across from me at dinner and told me about something funny that happened at her school. She went back to teaching last year, which she hadn't done in a decade, and it was clearly the right thing for her in a way I should have recognized earlier. A student had asked her if Shakespeare had ever considered writing for TikTok. She was laughing when she told it, and I looked at her face while she was laughing and I thought, I'm here. I'm actually here. Not because of the 27 calls, not because of the threat of losing everything, but because I finally asked Clifford's second question instead of the first one. Not what went wrong, what can I actually do differently? My name is Eugene Calloway. I'm 50 years old. I'm the principal of Hargrove County High School in Milledgeville, Georgia. I have been married to Pamela for 22 years. My daughter Reese lives in Atlanta now, and she calls me on Sundays. My brother Clifford is 15 minutes away, and he still makes coffee when I show up at his door. 4 months ago, my daughter looked me in the eye and told me to disappear. Her mother agreed. I didn't argue. I packed my bags. And I sat in my brother's guest room and finally decided to ask the harder question. This morning, my life is still mine. Sometimes the most important thing a man can do is walk out the right door so he can figure out which door to walk back through. You know what hits me hardest about Eugene's story? It wasn't the argument. It wasn't even those words, disappear, we'd be better off. What gets me is that a good man, a present man by every visible measure, had gone completely invisible to the people sitting right next to him. And nobody said a word until everything broke. So if you're watching this, and you've been the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who shows up but never quite lands, don't wait for 27 missed calls to figure out the difference. The people who love you shouldn't have to lose you to remember they need you. That's it from me. Take care of yourselves.